Hi there, my name's Rob Verkerk and I'm going to be talking to you about reframing food, health and communities through the lens of sustainability. My talk now is going to be based on a talk I gave at the Organic Institute in Ireland on the 19th of November 2019. It's a fantastic coming together of experts in the area of organic farming and in health to look at how some of the greatest challenges we face in terms of the planet, sustainability, food, health can be managed. And one of the starting points for us is how we change our view on these issues. We feel strongly that if you come at it from a systems perspective, you can actually make a lot of progress. So I want to start by initially taking you through a few of these systems that help us get a more complete and realistic, and perhaps holistic view of the problems that we face. The first system I want to talk to you about is the interconnectedness of nature, where all species are interconnected with one another, and we as humans are deeply connected with natural systems. As Giles Hutchins says in his book, it is but an illusion to imagine that we are separated from nature. The second system is scale. We need to think at what scale we view the planet or subsets of the planet. And when we step back and look at the planet as a whole, we realize it is a closed system where we are just one species in this mass of 2 million plus other species interdependent on each other. It's interesting, we go back to, say, an atomic scale, we see not only symmetry, but we also see this push me, pull you that exists between the nucleus, the protons and electrons that circulate around it, a little like the Earth circulates around the sun. We also need to think about what we as humans have done to the knowledge that we use to understand the world and processes and create human endeavors through industry and society. And in the West in particular, we have developed silos of knowledge. We've used a reductionist process to understand things at an ever deeper level, but sometimes we don't step back further enough to understand the interconnections or interactions between these different silos. And in healthcare and even in agriculture, these silos are very, very well developed. Another system that we need to learn from, because without these systems the planet itself cannot survive, are the rainforests. And in fact coral reefs as well. Rainforests and coral reefs are the most complex natural ecosystems that we know of, and of course they're massively under threat at the moment. And it's interesting, when we go in to study rainforests and coral reefs, we don't look for the bits of those ecosystems that aren't functioning properly. We don't look for the toucans and the insects that are sitting on the forest floor that may have died. We look at the interactions between the living elements of those systems. And it's interesting, when we look at healthcare, we have become so disease-centric. We actually look at the failures in the system, the bits that are broken, and the disease. We don't look at the health and the vigor within those systems. And if we're going to apply the lens of sustainability, we need to look at the systems that really help generate health within them. The next system that helps us understand more about the problems that we face is the industrial and globalized agro-food system. This system does change dramatically the genetics, the food quality that most of us are now experiencing, and it has profound impacts on health. In fact, now if we look at the chronic disease rates, most of them are heavily influenced by this globalized, industrialized food supply on which most of us are reliant. The next system is the political system that underpins the control processes for both food and for health. Many of us think of these systems, for many of us, as being democratic, but actually much of the true democratic processes on which we rely have broken down. We've moved to a situation which cronyism, a small collection of individuals who control corporations and control governments without considering the will of the people, now control the destiny of most of us. The next system is the human brain, our own control system. Many of us now live in a place where we're governed by fear, and to be exposed to fear a lot of the time, whether that's through the news or the concerns about our futures, actually doesn't allow us to use the most evolved parts of the human brain. And if we look from an evolutionary perspective at the three main developments in the human brain, from our original ancestral lizard brain through to our mammalian brain, our limbic system, through to the forebrain. The forebrain is about using reasoning and rationality to understand the world around us. And when we're in a state of fear, we move back to the limbic brain, our midbrain, which is a little bit, our amygdala is a little bit like a smoke detector that is looking out for danger, and it responds without necessarily using reason or rationality. And it doesn't make necessarily for good decisions in complex situations that we face. And even more than that, when you're really in an extremely fearful position, even that can disengage and we move back into our reptilian brain, which is just about basic survival. So we need to find ways of really managing our autonomic nervous system so that we can actually engage the most advanced parts of our brain. And what about the metabolic systems within us that control our function? As the virtual metabolic human has shown from the University of Luxembourg, there is a huge complex of over 135 different metabolic pathways on which we rely. And all of these are influenced by elements of our environment, and in particular the food, the nutrients, the micronutrients to which we are exposed. And we need to understand the relationship between our internal and our external environment if we're going to achieve optimum function, which is really how you create a sustainable healthcare system. And then we need to also appreciate emergence and flow within natural systems. Everywhere around us, these natural systems change, they metamorphise. And we as humans need to do the same thing in this changing environment and understand that if we can start to emerge and flow in symmetry with natural systems, we can actually get the most out of humanity too, while not destroying the planet on which we're entirely dependent. So ultimately, change is about system change. We can be very concerned about climate change or healthcare change or agricultural change, but we do need to think about the entire system in its most holistic sense. In looking at system change, we need to understand the relationship between knowledge, the information that we have to play with in making decisions that are about our future, about our sustainability, about the sustainability of future generations, and also belief systems. And it's interesting that belief systems can be entirely separate from knowledge. We look at the relevance of information that we are given. Some of it we only receive from specific channels via news media or via certain scientific publications. And we look at data, and we can analyze this data, both quantitative and qualitative. But many of us also are looking at how plausible these data are. And it's only really when we see a consistent logic structure between our belief systems and this knowledge, and that we have validation for that, that we can sort of be committed and convinced about our particular viewpoints. And many times this conviction comes from rather incomplete information. So we have to understand how complete is this information, and a systems perspective does ensure that we have more data to play with. Really important that we do this. And this really brings us to looking more closely at sustainability itself. It is broadly agreed that there are three main pillars of sustainability: social, environmental, and economic. And it's interesting that economics plays such a big part in sustainability now, because economics is about the currency. It's the currency that we apply to resources in this world. And many of the problems that we face relate to the fact that this currency has not necessarily been applied using the laws of nature. So we've, if you like, haven't necessarily apportioned sufficient value to things like air quality or water quality, or the quality of soils. As we apply more and more of an ecological perspective, we're in a better position to apportion resources and economics in a more rational way. So what we eat matters a lot. It matters an awful lot for health, for the environment, and we have to understand the bigger context, the geopolitical, political, economic, social, cultural situation that underpins the way in which we are supplied with our food and what we choose to eat. And of course, if we use a systems approach to doing this, we quickly see that some of the statistics that we get force-fed, excuse the pun, only look at part of the system. For example, we can get obsessed with greenhouse gas emissions when looking at environmental impacts of agriculture and not take into account the way in which agricultural systems, which are mixed cropping systems with livestock, can become incredibly effective sinks for carbon sequestration. So the Eat Lancet Commission, which published in the Lancet in January 2019, was an attempt to try and find a planetary diet that would work for human health and for the environment. It has many problems. We published a detailed critique. If you want to find out more about this, please download our critique. And you'll also find a paper that I have written for the Journal of Holistic Healthcare that was published in the autumn of 2019 to look at some of its flaws, some of the problems that we see from a detailed analysis using a systems approach of both the health side as well as the environmental side of the Eat Lancet approach. So food is fundamental to human beings in so many ways. Food isn't just an energy source, it is information. It is also a medicine. You can go to many parts of the world and actually get menus that have medicinal prescriptions. In the Western world, regulators have created a very artificial borderline between foods that should be non-medicinal, not have therapeutic applications, because that is reserved for prescription licensed pharmaceuticals. And of course we see a whole emerging sphere of science around the relationship between food and microorganisms, looking at gut microbiome health and also the gut-brain axis. And ultimately, food also is a way in which you bring communities together, both at the level of food producers and food consumers, but also within communities and within families. People eating around a table, really triggering their parasympathetic side of their autonomic nervous system, their rest and digest side, so that we can actually get all the nutrients out of food. That doesn't happen in many places in the Western world today. People living fast lifestyles where they're eating on the move, often in their sympathetic state, so they can't assimilate foods properly. Governments have long had guidelines telling the public how to eat. We see major issues in relation to available science around these guidelines, and of course we see large sectors of the population actually eating the way in which governments want us to eat, and yet chronic disease rates and autoimmune disease rates are escalating at an unprecedented rate. We need to change how we eat, when we eat, what we eat. We tell you how to do this in our Food for Health guidelines, and if you want to see a video about it, please watch our Food for Health guidelines unwrapped video. It's not a surprise to many of us that the existing healthcare system is unsustainable. We have escalating rates of non-communicable diseases, we've got an ever-aging population structure, we've got social care systems that are collapsing under the burden, and the social and economic costs of the diseases that we face could pretty much bankrupt economic systems as they currently stand. So we have to radically change how we do healthcare. Our blueprint for health system sustainability is an attempt using a consensus approach, taking into account information, published science and opinions from a very wide range of sources of how we can actually do this at a community level, working outside of the primary structures of healthcare that are really built around acute care and not chronic care. And of course, fundamentally what we've done in our blueprint is turn the system around so that we're focusing not on disease but on health and on creating health. So you can download the PDF of our blueprint report from our website on the Health System Sustainability Campaign page. You can also go to our YouTube channel and find a whole range of videos that will explain what the Blueprint project is all about. So how do we go about system change? Many people feel totally disempowered. They're waiting for governments or corporations to come to them and say, here is the solution. But the reality is the solution's already available to us. We can change from a bottom-up process by communities changing behaviors, changing what you eat, how you move, how you relax, how you think even, but also how we interact with each other. Another really important thing that we need to do is change how we shop, how we spend our money. Choosing what we buy. Society has turned people increasingly into consumers, where we blindly make decisions about buying things that we don't necessarily need, that aren't necessarily good for us or good for the planet. And those changes are already happening in communities. So how we spend the money we have in our pocket, however little or much that is, can make a dramatic influence on the systems around us. And of course it's how we use those objects, those material things in our life, and how we recycle or reuse those things, how much we waste, makes a huge difference too. And finally, how we vote can be incredibly important. We have to vote when we live in democratic societies for groups of leaders, of politicians that can actually make a difference, that do understand the kind of perspectives, the kind of challenges that we face. And so I would say use your vote wisely.